we are talking about endurance. When you are doing the same repetitive action for a long enough period of time, the body begins to tap into fat directly as a fuel source. That's why a lot of my clients, that's why even myself, have gotten really great results in a really short period of time, because we're just doing the things that work. So let's dive into it. So when I was in Peru, I was studying abroad there. Peru is a beautiful place. They got Machu Picchu, things like that, llamas. Never mind, sidetracked. So in Peru, the altitude there is very high. The higher up you are in altitude, the less oxygen there is that's in the air. You know, you could think of it like putting like a flavored electrolyte packet in your water and someone taking half of the powder out. It's like you're still drinking the same amount of water, just how you're still taking the same amount of breath, but the quantity of oxygen in that breath, the quantity of electrolyte powder that's in that water is way less. So when I was there, we were studying the effects that this has on the human body. And we are going on this really long hike, multiple days. And then it got to a point where I'm like, let me pick up the pace a little bit. So I'm moving and I'm feeling pretty good. And then like out of nowhere, I just had this feeling of like exhaustedness. But it was weird because in my body, I felt like I had more energy. My functionality was just not there. I was like, this is weird. I'm feeling out of shape. I'm like, I don't know, like, this is really weird, but I could still feel like I could push myself. By the way, when you get to that point, you stop, you slow down, because what was happening is the amount of oxygen that my body was burning was much greater than the amount of oxygen it was consuming. So that feeling of like, well, I feel like I've got more energy, it's quite literally because stored within our muscles and in our liver, we store this molecule called glycogen. And it's basically sugar. It's sugar that our body is holding on to. So then when we do an explosive movement, when we're lifting weights, we are tapping into that glycogen because it's very quick. And when we're going about our day, oxygen is the fuel source that our body mainly relies on. In fact, it relies on it so much that if you, let's say, held your breath for 20 minutes, you'd be dead. You know, like that's why we have to constantly be breathing, because we are so dependent on oxygen as a fuel source for our body. Like you could go a month without eating, you can go probably like a week without drinking water, but you can barely go 10 minutes without breathing oxygen. So when we were up there and we were studying the effects of oxygen on the body, that's when I began to realize, I'm like, what if as we are exercising, we leverage the oxygen so that we don't pull from the glycogen? That's why when you are doing steady state cardio, body pulls from fat, because it's like we don't need the glycogen. We're really good on oxygen, but we're still burning, we still need energy. So where are we going to get the extra energy from? Well, we don't need to breathe harder. We're good with oxygen. We don't need to pull from the glycogen because we're not doing anything explosive. So the body's like, well, I guess we'll just pull from the fat. And that's why this is really important to be doing endurance and adding that into your training routine. So the thing I had learned in Peru is it's really important to exercise in a way where you are not using more oxygen than your body's consuming. And it's also important to not tap into that glycogen by doing like hard movements, because once you tap into that glycogen, the body is like, we need more oxygen, and then you start breathing more deeply. So what's a form of steady state cardio? Very easily, you can be jogging, just a light jog. I'm in this bike room here. You could be seated on a bike and pedaling. You could be on an elliptical where you're like moving the arms and the feet are sliding. Anything that gets your heart rate up to like, I think it's referred to as like zone 2. When you are at a point where you're moving, your heart rate is within a certain zone, you can still carry a conversation, like you're exercising and still have conversation. That's the zone you want to be in. That's the place in your fitness when you are doing that movement for a long period of time, we'll just say jogging, that the body's going to be pulling from the fat. And there's a really cool thing that happens as well. I don't know if you've ever done an activity, let's say you're cleaning, and you just kind of get in the zone. It feels like your body's on autopilot. You know what you need to do, and you're just like kind of doing the actions. You don't got to think about it much. The body does that as well when you're jogging. It gets to a certain point where the body's like, all right, we're zapping these neurons. We're sending the same signal, doing the same movement at the same pace. We don't need to put as much conscious effort into it. So the brain kind of goes on autopilot. Like right now, snapping the fingers, bobbing up and down. I'm not even thinking about that. as soon as I started to think about it, that's when I had started to mess up. But the body gets into this, it taps into something called mirror neurons, or like autonomic neurons, and body gets into this rhythmic state. That's another sign that you are in a good zone. So when you are tapping into those autonomic neurons, when you're good with the amount of oxygen and you're not tapping into the glycogen, you're going to see a significant increase in calories being burned. And the thing that's also really, really neat with this as well, it's one of the only forms of exercise where the goal of it is to burn a lot of calories during it. So if you're lifting weights, for example, sure, you're burning calories while lifting the weights, but it's all the stuff that happens after the workout, that your body's tapping into fat, that it's using a lot of energy to repair the muscles. But when you're doing this steady state endurance, like, the point is to burn a lot of calories while you're doing it. So the only way to burn more calories while doing the steady state cardio is to just do it longer. You don't want to go faster because it's going to use more oxygen, and then you're not going to be tapping into the autonomic neurons. You're going to be using glycogen. You're not going to be using fat. The worksheet that I have, when you're going through it, it's going to show you a progression. It's going to show you how to start off. If you've not done this before, it's going to show you how to kind of like gauge and measure, making improvements so that your body's continually adapting and growing. And on the note of needing to do the same movement repeatedly over and over again, there's a few things that I wanted to point out that you need to be on the lookout for. You know, these little eyeballs are like on the lookout. The first thing is form. When you're doing the same repeated motion over and over and over again, if you're not doing the proper form, you're just slowly wearing down your body, especially something like your knees. And it's kind of like when you go to the car, like Valvoline or something, you're getting your car looked at and you're like, oh, we got to rotate the tires. The reason why they say stuff like that is because if the tires aren't aligned properly, all those rotations are just slowly breaking down the components within the car. And I don't want that to happen to you, because if you're jogging for like an hour, let's say you're like slamming your feet on the floor, or your ankles kind of like roll in slightly as you're jogging, that stuff over time will begin to break down your joints and will cause inflammation in like your hips, knees, ankles, possibly. You're not doing it right, you're going to wake up the next day and not be sore, you're going to be in pain. And I don't want that for you. So if you're a little nervous about that, or let's say you're like, well, I've got a lot of the extra weight, I don't know if my joints are going to be happy with me pounding down on them, then by all means, sit on a bike, use the elliptical. The main goal here is you got to be doing the same motion for like a half hour. Like, follow the worksheet that I have there, do those things, stay within the heart rate zone, and you should be golden. Now, the second thing that you got to look out for, I've mentioned this before, keep an eye on the amount of effort that you're putting in. If you're putting in way too much effort and you're exhausted and you're feeling tired and you're feeling out of breath, it means you're going too hard. You might be thinking like, yeah, going above and beyond. No, you don't want to. If you're doing, like, let's say you are on the treadmill, or we'll stick with the bike. Let's say you're on the bike and you're at a certain resistance and you're going and you're going. You're like, this is too much, I gotta dial it down. You're feeling good, you're doing that for 15 minutes. All right, I'll dial it back up. And you're going and you're going and you're like, oh, all right, I gotta dial it down again. You're doing it wrong. I'm just like, I gotta warn you, that is not how to do it. What you wanna do, you set it to a certain type of resistance, and you're doing that resistance for the entire 30 minutes, the entire 45 minutes, the entire hour, whatever resistance you set it to, you wanna make sure you can do that for the entirety of the time. If you have to dial it down, by all means, do so. But only dial it down just enough so that you don't have to dial it back up because it's too easy. Dial it down just enough so that you don't have to dial it down again. And whatever you set it to, remember that, so that next time you start at that resistance level. Or if you're on the treadmill and you're doing a certain pace, it has to be the same pace for the entire hour, the entire 45 minutes, the entire 30 minutes. You don't want to be changing the pace up. The goal here is you don't want to be feeling exhausted while you're doing it. You do not want to be out of breath while you're doing it. What you want to do is, I want you to imagine while you're exercising, you're on the phone with someone. You're having a conversation. You're able to go back and forth. You know, you're not leading the whole convo, but you're able to banter back and forth. And if someone's like, it sounds like, what are you doing, by the way? And it's like, oh, I'm just jogging. And it's like, oh, you're jogging? Oh, wow. Oh, okay. It doesn't want to be like, you pick up the phone. It's like, hey, sorry, I'm jogging right now. It's like, no, too much intensity. By keeping the effort at a point where your heart rate is in that zone, and I know I'm repeating myself, but this is like super important. By making sure the effort is at a point where you're within that heart rate zone, making sure the effort is at a point where you can maintain a conversation and not be out of breath, that means you're activating the autonomic neurons, the mirror neurons in the body, which means you are optimally utilizing the oxygen that your body's taken in, which means you are not tapping into glycogen. What this means is all of this adds up to your body being in an optimal state to burning fat for fuel. Endurance. It's very important. Follow that training because now you are at the point of hitting the gym, burning some calories, starting to sweat. It's going to be a lot of fun. So go do that. And I'll be having these things bullet pointed in case I kind of went on too much of a tangent here for you. Congratulations. Stick around because tomorrow it's going to be some fun stuff. That's where we get into talking about how you can lift weights to leverage fast fat burning and for building some muscle. All right. See you tomorrow.